So good evening, everyone. Welcome to our session of trauma, the second lecture on trauma, pancreaticoduodenal injuries. For this, we have invited a speaker, eminent speaker from Pune, Dr. Pradeep Sharma, sir. I ask our panelist, Dr. Qureshi, sir, to just give a brief introduction about the topic as well as speaker, and then start today's session.
Hello.
Over to you, Qureshi, sir. Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. I am very pleased to welcome Dr. Pradeep Sharma, who hails from Pune, and he's a very well-known faculty for practically all Nagpurians. I actually met and saw Dr. Pradeep Sharma for the very first time at the basic coloproctology's course at Bombay Hospital in Mumbai. Long back, I think it was 2002. And to my mind, at that time only, I had seen him as a great academician, and I have seen him grow, and I have seen him in various fora, and basically his interest is in coloproctology, but I think he's a great learner himself, and he goes about learning new things. And I have seen him take a lot of interest in the IITCC group and the trauma group. So that's
Yeah,
why he's
mobile,
here to talk to us about
mobile,
pancreatic duodenal injuries.
sir,
Recently
अपना
has gone to Madrid to learn about
स्पीकर आता है
hernia
वो
also.
माइक का एक
So
आइकन रहता
I think most people know about Dr. Pradeep Sharma and his skills in coloproctology, which we have seen in various workshops. Today's topic is basically one of the topics in our series on trauma, and this is a very vexatious area, pancreaticoduodenal injuries. Some of it we have actually discussed a little bit last time only. So, without wasting time, I would like to welcome Dr. Pradeep Sharma, and I would ask him and request him to start with his lecture. So, please go ahead.
Okay. And Dr. Yogesh, just confirm that today all the audience is able to hear me.
Yeah, sir. Just a minute. I'll ask one of the audience
Huh.
person.
Yeah, you can at random ask just 2-3 people whether they are able to listen to me.
I'll do that. I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And you
Dhananjay
can
Kane
tell
sir.
me when to start.
Yeah, yeah. Kane sir, I have unmuted your mic. Yeah, please type if you are. Yes, voice is loud and clear. That's what people have written here. I want 2 or 3 more people to just write that yes, everything is clear. Kane sir, Kaustubh Sarda sir, just give us a go ahead today. Dr. Prasad, is it okay? Voice is clear? Yes, yes, yes. We have got a confirmation. Go ahead.
Right. So good evening, everybody. And at the onset, I would like to thank Dr. Qureshi and Dr. Yogesh and all the office bearer of the Vidarbha Surgical Association to have given me this opportunity to talk to you on this topic of pancreaticoduodenal injury. Now, pancreaticoduodenal injury we are lucky that they are not very common because there's a lot of morbidity and mortality attached to pancreaticoduodenal injury. Most of my talk on pancreaticoduodenal injury is going to revolve around these 3 guidelines which have been set up, the AAST, that is Association of American Surgery for Trauma, Eastern Association of Surgery for Trauma, and Western Trauma Association. So these are the 3 main associations who deal and who have set up guidelines for various traumas, and not only trauma of pancreas and duodenum, but also trauma involving various other organs, solid organs, the hollow organs, the skeletal injuries, etc., thoracic organs, etc. And of course, there is a good journal, the World Journal of Emergency Surgery, which is also a reputed international journal, which is dedicated to management of trauma. Now, as far as injuries of pancreas and duodenum is concerned, they are always assessed in a combined way. We cannot separate the two because anatomically both these organs are very close to each other. They are intimately adherent to each other. Okay, if you see anatomically, the whole of the pancreas is engulfed by the sea of the duodenum, And this not only reflects in trauma, this reflects in other pathologies also. All of you know that when there is a tumor in the head of the pancreas, we have to do a Whipple's resection, which involves not only resecting the head of the pancreas, but also involves resecting the C of the duodenum or the loop of the duodenum. So it is because of this anatomical proximity of the pancreas with the duodenum, a combined assessment is very much essential, because combined injuries are very commonly seen. As much as 1/4 to 1/5 of the injuries are going to be a combined pancreatico-duodenal injury. So what are the implications of the anatomy on the injury pattern? Okay, the one thing we have to understand that most of the pancreas and the duodenum is they are retroperitoneal organ, and since they are retroperitoneal organ, it requires an injury of substantial severity, or it requires a forceful, blunt, or penetrating trauma to injure them. There are a lot of organs in front of the pancreas and the duodenum to protect it. So that is why only severe injury is going to cause an injury to the pancreas and the duodenum. So most of the duodenum, except the first part of the duodenum, is retroperitoneal. Now, since the duodenum is retroperitoneum, it lacks a serosal covering, and that is why whenever there is an injury and we repair it, the repairs, they have got a tendency to leak. We all know that all the part of those intestine which do not have a serosa, like the esophagus, like the lower rectum, which doesn't have a serosa, all of them, whenever you repair them, they have a tendency to leak. And what about pancreas? Pancreas is a very friable organ, because most of this trauma is going to occur in a normal pancreas. We know that when the patient has a tumor or patient has chronic pancreatitis, the pancreas becomes tough, the pancreas becomes fibrotic, and that helps in the sutures holding any anastomosis. But here the trauma occurs in a normal pancreas, and normal pancreas is quite friable. Sutures tend to cut through the tissue, and if at all the injury involves a duct, in addition to that, there is leakage of the digestive juices, which again adds to the complexity of the injury. What is the implication of physiology with the injury? Now, if you see the duodenum, it receives virtually all of the gastrointestinal secretion. So all secretion of the GIT except intestinal juice, they come in the duodenum. So that means that about 1.5 liter of gastric juice, 1.5 liter of pancreatic juice, 1 liter of saliva, and 1 liter of bile. So nearly 4 to 5 liter of juices, they come to the duodenum. So that is why if at all a patient has a fistula involving a duodenum, it can lead to a serious fluid and electrolyte problem. About 4 to 5 liters of fluid is going to come out. A lot of electrolytes are going to be lost in that, and that can turn the balance in a patient. At the same time, if there is any dehiscence of the suture line, it can again lead to leakage of these digestive enzymes. And you know that when bile and pancreas, they come together, they get activated, and the combination of bile and pancreas is very dangerous compared to both of them independently. Now, coming to the mechanism of injury. Now, as far as pancreas is concerned, when there is a blunt injury because of an impact, most of the time the injury will occur around the head or the neck of the pancreas, and this is because of the pancreas being struck against the spine of the spine or the lumbar vertebra. And if at all it's a penetrating injury, and among the penetrating injury, the most dangerous is a gunshot injury, because gunshot is a high velocity injury, is a high projectile or a high velocity injury. And when it goes when the bullet goes through the body, it not only causes injury along the track, but it causes a lot of collateral or a lot of damage by the side of the trajectory. You need not remember all these figures, but only thing what we can learn from this figure is that nearly 30 to 40% of injuries are also associated with injuries to other organs and other major organs like the liver, like the spleen, like the stomach, and not only that, even the major vessel. And this is what actually adds to the morbidity and the mortality. Now, coming back to the duodenum, if there is a blunt injury, now duodenum, it has something called as a closed loop obstruction, something which you see when you have a malignancy of a rectosigmoid junction along with a competent IC junction. You have a closed loop obstruction. So similarly, the duodenal loop is also closed because at the upper end, the pylorus is closed. Pylorus is a sphincter, so it is usually closed all the time except to allow the food to go from stomach to the duodenum. And at the fourth part of the duodenum, there is what is called as a ligament of Treats, and there is acute angulation. So that is why duodenal loop is something like a closed loop. So when there is a blunt injury, it causes a crushing of the duodenum against the spine, against the backbone. And that usually leads to a blowout in the second and the third part of the duodenum, or in the C of the duodenal loop. So that is why the second and the third part of the duodenum are the most common site for laceration in case of a blunt injury abdomen. Then another site which is very commonly cured is at the DJ junction, because DJ junction is a junction of the fixed and the mobile part of the duodenum. So another 1/4 of the injury are going to occur near the ligaments of or near the fourth part of the duodenum, because we that there is a rapid acceleration, the injury always occurs at the junction of the fixed and the mobile part. So DJ flexure, IE junction, these are two junctions where there is fixed and the mobile part, and these two, in any rapid acceleration deceleration injury, they are two junctions which are likely to get injured. So what is the surgical implication of that? The surgical implication of this is that they must be carefully examined by mobilizing them, by incising the peritoneum over them, to expose them completely whenever we are managing these type of injury. Now, as I have told you that nearly 40–50% of them would have associated injuries to surrounding organs like liver, spleen, vascular injuries, etc. Now, I have told you right in the beginning that we are lucky that pancreas and duodenum are not very commonly found, because the morbidity mortality is very high. So if they were very common, then the mortality morbidity of all these traumatic abdomen would have been very high. So because of the retroperitoneal nature, because of the anatomical situation of this organ, they are not very common. And I think most of the trauma center, even the major trauma centers, they usually deal with this type of injury in up to double figures. Now, about the diagnosis of that. Now, this is something which you have to keep in mind about the diagnosis, that you have to be aware of it, because ultimately what eye sees is what mind knows. Okay, so you have to be very much aware of this injury, because the clinical changes in the early part are extremely subtle or extremely likely to be missed unless and until life-threatening complications set in. So that is why whenever a patient comes with any upper abdominal injury, you have to keep the pancreas and duodenum in mind. So any patient who has ecchymosis in the upper abdomen, any patient who has a classical seatbelt syndrome, or a handlebar injury, or a steering wheel injury in the epigastrium, you have to always be aware of a pancreas and duodenum injury in your mind, because a delay means disaster and death. So any disaster, any delay in the treatment is going to lead to a disaster. And this is what is reflected in the figure, that is time to treatment. Okay, studies have been done that whenever the treatment is delayed, that is from the time of accident to the time of treatment. So whenever it is delayed by more than 24 hours, the mortality rises to about 40%. And whenever the diagnosis and the management starts within first 24 hours, the mortality is around 11%. So nearly 4 times the increase in mortality is seen when the delay goes beyond 24 hours. So this is the importance of diagnosing them. nearly 2/3 of the patient who survive for more than 48 hours will end up with complication. So if you don't do anything and the patient survives the early part of 48 hours, they would land up with complication. What are those complications? We'll see a little later on. 37% of the deaths are late due to complication like fistula, abscess, anastomotic breakdown, etc. So this itself gives us or tells us about the time to treatment, or we should not delay the treatment. The importance of starting the treatment and importance of being aware of pancreaticoduodenal injury. Now coming to what are the investigation. The first and the most important investigation is amongst the blood investigation is a amylase and lipase level. But then all of you are aware that 25% of penetrating trauma and 80% of blunt trauma are going to have a elevated amylase and lipase level. So any patient who has a perforation of any part of the intestine or even a stomach, they would have elevation of amylase and lipase because the digestive juices would leak into the peritoneal cavity, they would get absorbed and the blood levels would rise. Okay, so you have to be aware of an elevated amylase and lipase level. Now we all know that half-life period of lipase is more than amylase, so that is why naturally lipase is more specific than amylase. And you are supposed to do a baseline study at 3 hours, at admission at 3 hours, and repeat every 6 hourly, especially in a cases where you are going in for NOM. NOM is non-operative management. I will just talk about it a little later, but right now you have to remember that any patient who is going in for non-operative management, you have to repeat this amylase and lipase frequently. And a consistently increased or increasing amylase lipase level should make one suspect a duodenal and pancreatic injury. So this is one dictum you have to keep in mind. Now about the radiological investigation. Plain radiological investigation are not very helpful, and most of the time whatever findings we see on X-ray, we diagnose them in retrospect, after we have operated the patient or after some other imaging, sophisticated imaging has been done, and then we come to know here there is some gas or here there is some intraperitoneal gas, etc., obliteration of psoas, etc. But you have to be aware what could be the changes like gas bubble around the retroperitoneum, near the psoas, near the kidney, near the upper lumbar spine. Again, because these patients are unprepared patient, they are not empty stomach, they are a trauma patient, they are coming in emergency situation. So that is why the preparation of this patient is not going to be good, and you may not find all these on plain X-ray film. A free intraperitoneal gas in biliary tree, obliteration of psoas shadow. And if there is a fracture involving either the transverse process of lumbar vertebra or a L4-5, what is called as a chance fracture, or associated rib injuries on the right side, then again these are indirect evidences or indirect indicators of a patient having injury to pancreas and duodenum. So most of the time you have to remember that these injuries are identified in retrospect. Now what about the contrast X-ray? So contrast X-ray again do not have much role in an emergency situation. Sometimes they can be used to diagnose a duodenal perforation or a hematoma, especially when other modalities may not be available. But you have to take care that you initially use a water-soluble gastrographin, don't use barium directly. So first use a water-soluble contrast gastrographin, give it through a Ryle's tube, because most of these patients would be empty stomach, or you might have already put in a Ryle's tube to decompress the stomach. And you are supposed to give 3 positions, the right lateral, supine and left lateral position, and see whether the gastrographin leaks out or not. And if a gastrographin contrast swallow is negative, if you want more accuracy, you might put in barium, but then barium is quite dangerous if at all it leaks. The barium peritonitis is one of the worst peritonitis, sets up a very bad type of chemical peritonitis. So what does a hematoma looks like? A duodenal hematoma looks like, because duodenal hematoma is one of the quite common injuries, And this is because of the retroperitoneal nature of the duodenum. It is well supported by tissue in front of it. So many times a direct transection or a laceration doesn't happen. What you get is a hematoma, and because of the tight serosa or peritoneum in front of it, the hematoma gets localized. So what does a complete what does a hematoma looks like? It causes a complete obstruction to the duodenum and causes an appearance of a coiled spring appearance or a stacked coin appearance, as if coins have been stacked on each other or like a spring. Okay, and this is because of the external compression of the hematoma on the contrast. Sonography again has very limited role. Most of the time sonography is limited to performing a FAST or EFAST in the emergency room. And if at all the patient is eligible for NOM, that is non-operative treatment, in that case, you would be performing sonography daily to keep a watch on how the abdomen is progressing. You should suspect if at all there is a solid organ injury is absent, and if there is a free fluid, then you can suspect a pancreaticodural or a hollow organ injury. So liver and spleen injuries will be ruled out by sonography. But you have to remember that sonography is an operator dependent investigation, and many times because of the physics, if a patient is very hefty, patient is very obese, again sonography may not be accurate. Now another problem with sonography is that it cannot help you to grade the injuries. So because we usually grade this pancreatic and duodenal injury according to the AST criteria, and that helps you to guide, that helps in guiding the management of this injury. So on sonography, we cannot grade the injury. So that is why that again is a limitation for sonography. CT scan today is a gold standard investigation for pancreas and duodenal injury, and a duodenal injury will present with a retroperitoneal collection of contrast, extraluminal gas. There would be a breach in the continuity of the duodenum. So if you see the cine loop on CT scan, you would be able to see the breach in the continuity of the duodenal wall, even before the signs of peritonitis set in. Hematoma is very nicely diagnosed, intramural gas collection, and any focal duodenal wall thickening of more than 4 millimeter should make you suspect of a duodenal injury. For pancreas, one has to remember that you have to take a fine cut contrast CT. So normally we go in for a 5 millimeter section, but here you have to take 2 millimeter section because pancreas is a horizontally placed organ and it's not a very big organ. So you have to take smaller cuts, and the accuracy is roughly around 85%. But the main problem with CT scan is that it cannot detect, or it's not a very good investigation for ductal injury, because pancreatic duct injury is something which is more important. When we are treating or when we are managing a pancreas trauma, we need to know whether the duct is injured or not. So detecting a ductal injury, you can make out only in about half the patient. So the dictum is that whenever you see a parenchymal laceration, which is involving more than 50% of the parenchyma of the pancreas, that is more than 50% of the body of the pancreas is involved in a laceration, you assume that the patient might be having, or you assume that the patient has a very high risk of having a ductal injury. So this is something which you should, which should keep you alert as far as ductal injury is concerned. And suppose in case the first CT scan was non-specific or normal, you are supposed to repeat a scan at 24 to 48 hours interval. And this is more important, especially if there is a rise in amylase and lipase level, or if a patient is not settling down clinically, or if the patient is having increase in the abdominal pain. So CT scan has a good positive predictive value and a little negative predictive value. But at the same time, you have to remember that it is not a plain CT. You have to give oral contrast and IV contrast. So it has to be a contrast enhanced CT scan. A plain CT scan is not much useful. Coming to DPL, DPL again has very limited role in pancreas and duodenal perforation. Okay. And Many times, rather than seeing the cells, the RBCs and the WBCs in the fluid, if you estimate the amylase and lipase in the fluid, that is more important and that carries more value compared to serum and urine amylase and lipase level. ERCP is a good investigation and it can provide a roadmap for the management. It will provide you an algorithm for management of pancreatic injury. You could even diagnose the pancreatic injury and you can even do intervention. If at all there is a injury, you could put in a stent. But the main problem lies that most of these patients are coming in the night, middle of the night at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the middle of the night or early morning. And at that time, an expert gastroenterologist to perform a ERCP may not be there. This is not only the problem in our country, but even abroad, where the health services or the trauma care are supposed to be good. Even those countries, they have this problem of having access to expert gastroenterology service for doing this ERCP and stenting in the middle of the night. And again, it has no role, especially if a patient is unstable. If a patient is hemodynamically unstable, ERCP again is going to be a problem. So ERCP will help you to locate the site of transection. So that might be seen as extravasation if it is a side injury, or cutoff if it is a complete laceration. And it would fail. A ERCP could fail in about 15% of the patient. So that is why an ERCP is not the first investigation. It is always done after a CT scan. So CT scan should give you some idea as to the damage to the pancreas, damage to the parenchyma, and then only you should go ahead with a ERCP. And what if the ERCP fails? If ERCP failed, there have been some literature that you can do a PTC also, but then PTC, that is percutaneous transhepatic cholangiography, but that also requires services of an expert gastroenterologist or an expert interventional radiologist. Now, ERCP carries all the risk of endoscopy, especially in an emergency situation. It can even exacerbate a smoldering pancreatitis, which can occur in case of a trauma, and sometimes sepsis by overfilling a disrupted duct, which may lead to delayed strictures also. Now, today we have most of the regional center or district would be having a MRI machine, and especially all the medical colleges are definitely having a MRI machine. So MRI and MRCP, again, they form an important investigation in assessing the trauma to pancreas and the duodenum. Most of these centers would be having a 1 or 1.5 Tesla machine, which is good enough to perform a MRCP. And it is a non-invasive investigation. You can do it very rapidly in about 15-20 minutes. And especially if it is a child or a pregnant woman, MRI is preferred over a CT scan. There have been some articles of a dynamic secreting stimulated MRCP. So secreting is one humoral substance which increase the pancreatic secretion or which stimulates the pancreas. So if there is a minor injury, that injury gets exacerbated or that injury will get magnified when you stimulate it with secreting. So that physiology is taken help of to perform a DSS MRCP. So there have been some interesting literature on that, but again, it's not very easily available. Secreting is not easily available, and this might be a very time consuming type of investigation, and you're not able to perform any sort of therapeutic maneuver. So that is again a limitation of this DSS MRCP, and it may not be much suitable for a multi-injured or a case of polytrauma. What about hepatobiliary scintigraphy, that is HIDA scan, PIPIDA scan? Again, they have no role in emergency setting because they take a long scan times, and many times they are not, the services of a nuclear physician may not be available in an emergency setting. Diagnostic laparoscopy again has a limited role because all of you know that being retroperitoneal structure, both of them are behind the peritoneum. So it's a difficult anatomy, and many times you cannot diagnose the anatomy or anatomical aberration correctly. So the chances of missed injury are very high on diagnostic laparoscopy. So all these other investigation like using a loop, using intraperitoneal, intraoperative lacrimal probes, intraoperative ERCP, ultrasound, secreting. So there is some scant literature on that, but still they are still not the part of main guideline as far as management of trauma is concerned. Now coming to the optimal management. So we have already seen the physiology, we have seen the anatomy, we have seen the various implications of that, we have seen the epidemiology investigation. So let us come to how to manage these trauma. That is the most important part. So an optimal management of pancreas and duodenum injury involves three things. We need to know whether the patient is stable or not hemodynamically. We need to know what is the clinical presentation and what is the grade of the injury. So these are the three things we have to have at the back of our mind when we are treating this injury. Now, what is meant by hemodynamic stability, or what is meant by hemodynamic instability? So nearly half of these patients would be unstable, because you know that I told you in the beginning that being retroperitoneal structure, you require a trauma of sufficient severity to cause injury to this organ. So because of the severe injury, most of these patients would be hemodynamic unstable or unstable. They would also be having associated injury. Half of them would be having them to the liver, to the spleen, to the stomach, to the vascular organs. So that is why they would be unstable. Systolic BP less than 90, all the signs of vasoconstriction like cool, clammy skin, decreased capillary filling, altered consciousness, or if the BP is more than 90 but it is requiring infusions or vasopressor drug to keep it above, base excess of -5 millimoles, shock index of more than 1, or patient requiring 4 to 6 units of transfusion itself in first 24 hours. These are indicates, according to the trauma guideline, these are all indicators of hemodynamic instability. Now, why this hemodynamic instability is important? Because once you resuscitate this patient, once you put them on IV fluid, vasopressor, plasma expanders, blood, you have to see whether the patient responds or not. And if he responds, if the patient is a non-responder, the non-responder patient who doesn't respond to that is immediately going to go to the operating room. But if a patient is a responder, you have to see that if he's a responder or if he's a transient responder. So what do you mean by responder? When the heart rate will come down, respiratory rate will come down, BP will come up, urine output improves, skin becomes better, warm, sensorium improve, and peripheral pulses are now felt. So this means that the patient is responding to your resuscitation. So if a patient is responding to your resuscitation, this patient requires to undergo detailed interventional radiological procedure. So these are the patients who would require other radiological procedure like which we have seen, like a CT scan, like a MRI, like MRCP, etc. And that would quantify whether this patient would go for NOM, that is non-operative management, or the patient would go for operative management, depending on the finding on this radiological procedure. At the same time, those who are non-responders or patients who are not responding to your all the resuscitative effort, these patients would go in for what is called as damage control surgery. And especially if the emergency fast, that is EFAST or FAST, is positive, which indicate that this patient is definitely having some intra-abdominal injury, this patient would go in for a damage control surgery. And damage control surgery, as you know, is to avoid that lethal triad of hypothermia, acidosis, and coagulopathy. Now, how to deal with this injuries? You have to have a proper grading of that, because grading is going to give you a roadmap, or it's going to guide you as to what type of operation you are going to do or what type of management you are going to carry out for this patient. So for that, we have guidelines set up by AAST. So you have a organ injury scale, OIS, and according to that, according to the pancreas injury trauma scale, the pancreatic injury are divided into 5 grades. Now, most important are grade 3, 4, and 5. The grade 1 and 2 are most of the time treated by non-operative management. but it is the grade 3, 4, and 5 which carry a high morbidity and mortality attached to it. And they are the ones we need to know more in details about that. Coming to the AST for the duodenum, there is the duodenum injury trauma scale, again divided into 5 types. And again, you have to see that the one which are lethal are grade 3, 4, and 5. That is laceration involving 50 to 70% or 100% of the D1, D2, D3. Laceration which are involving the circumference along with the ampulla of the distal common bile duct. Now, this is something which also you have to keep in mind, that since the terminal part of the common bile duct goes through the parenchyma of the duodenum, so that is why an extrahepatic biliary injury also you have to keep in your mind when you are treating with when you are thinking of pancreatic duodenal injury. And of course, the grade 5 injuries are the massive type of injury where there is a massive disruption of the DP complex or devascularization of the duodenum. So once you have done the grading, we will start with the management. Now, initial management is always by a surgeon or by a emergency physician who is trained in trauma management, and the late treatment would be by a multidisciplinary treatment which comprises of HPB or a GI surgeon, medical gastroenterologist, interventional radiologist, and an intensivist. Now, I told you in the beginning that some of these patients would be suitable for NOM. What is this NOM? NOM stands for non-operative management. So this concept of non-operative management came from after the solid organ injuries, that is injuries to liver and spleen. It was found that not all patients of liver and spleen injury or solid organ injury, they require operation. Some of them are better off, or in fact, they found that the success rate of non-operative management was much better and the mortality, morbidity were much lower in those patients who have managed conservatively or without any operation. So subsequently, the scope of NOM also expanded to other organs, and we can today extend it to even the pancreas and the duodenum. So who are the patients who are going to be subjected to non-operative management? Patients who are hemodynamically stable. Okay, so the patient who come to the ER, you find that all the hemodynamics are good. You have imaged these patients and you have found that they have grade 1 or grade 2 injuries. So you can wait in these patients, and most of the duodenal hematomas, you don't require to be operated. You can wait even up to 14 days in these patients without operating on them. But you have to remember that these patients who qualify for NOM, they should not have other organ injuries, because if there are other organ injuries, then that makes the thing very complex, and an assessment of the patient on day-to-day basis very complex, and that is why these patients would be a limitation for NOM. Now, if a patient has associated liver injury or splenic injury or bowel injury along with pancreatic injury, you know that the daily assessment is going to be very, very difficult. So that is why there should not be other associated organ injury. Another important point of NOM is that you should have a 24 hours availability of good imaging, intervention, and intensive care. So these 3I, that is imaging, intervention, and intensive care, should be available round the clock for the patient to qualify for NOM. Because you know that these patients can deteriorate at any moment of the time. So they can go down, rapidly go down at 11 o'clock in the night, 12 o'clock in the night. So good imaging should be available in the middle of the night. Good intervention should be available. Intensive care should be available round the clock. Then and then only they qualify for NOM. And at the same time, you have to be aware that at any given moment of the time, if the NOM fails, this patient should be, you should have all the facility available for the patient to be taken up for urgent laparotomy. So we have seen all the investigation, we have seen the earlier resuscitation, damage control study, damage control surgery, we have seen NOM. Now let us see what are the indications for early surgery, or which patient qualify for early surgery or urgent surgery. So naturally, if a patient has signs of peritonitis, that is tenderness, guarding, rebound, the patient would go in for surgery. Hemodynamic instability. We have seen that all those patients where the BP is less than 90, patient who are tachypneic, peripheral pulses are not felt, so all the signs of vasoconstriction, they are going to go in for, and especially if the EFAST is positive, they are going to go to the operating room. Any signs of intestinal spill, either clinically or on imaging like CT scan, ultrasound, again they go into the directly to the OR. If you have graded the injury on imaging and a patient has grade 3 and above, again, and especially if the ducts are involved in pancreas, if the ducts are involved, again signs of, again indication for urgent surgery. All the failures of NOM will go for urgent surgery, and if there is obvious evisceration or impalement, that is something, a sharp object which has gone inside like a rod or like a wooden stick, or if there is evisceration, that is bowel coming out, omentum coming out, colon coming out, naturally these patients are going to go in for early surgery or urgent surgery. So you have taken the patient for surgery, and suppose this patient was hemodynamically unstable, you were not able to do much imaging, so just EFAST was positive, and you have taken the patient for laparotomy. When to suspect that the patient is having injury to the pancreas and duodenum? You should know all these things. If there is free gas or if there is bile stain fluid around that area, if there are intestinal juices in that area, if there is a retroperitoneal hematoma, ecchymosis, or sometime if the gas comes out in the retroperitoneum, it can cause a crepitus. So if there is crepitus in that area around the root of mesentery, mesocolon, all these things should make you worry or make you suspect that this patient might be having injury to pancreas and duodenum. And if there is any doubt, the patient is already having a Ryle's tube, just tell your anesthetist to put in methylene blue to the Ryle's tube. That is another intraoperative maneuver which you can do to diagnose a pancreaticoduodenal injury, and especially duodenal injury. Now, when you are operating this patient, there are 3 or 4 things you have to do. So they have to be on your to-do list. You cannot afford to miss them. You have to do these 3-4 maneuvers to properly assess and treat a injury to pancreas and duodenum. What are they? The first thing is what a Cocker's maneuver. All of you know Cocker's maneuver. Cocker's maneuver means mobilization of the C loop of the duodenum. So this will give you a good access to the posterior aspect of D1, D2, D3, and some part of D4. Now, how far? What is a indicator of a good Cocker's maneuver? You have to see the IVC and you have to see most of the aorta. A good Cockerization means you have to see the IVC, you have to see the right renal vein, you have to see the anterior aspect of the kidney, and you have to see some part of the abdominal aorta. This means a good Cockerization. And not only good Cockerization, but you have to do what is called as an extended Cockerization, or what is called as cattle and brush maneuver. That is, you have to mobilize the pancreas, duodenum. Along with that, you have to mobilize the hepatic flexure, the right colon, IC junction, and the terminal small bowel, right till the root of the mesentery. So this will give you a good access to D4, the 4th part of the duodenum. So these are 2 important things you have to do. Cockerization, and not only Cockerization, but extended Cockerization. Now, opening of the gastrocolic omentum or the lesser sac again is very important, because unless until you open that, you cannot see the anterior aspect of the pancreas. Okay, so opening of the gastrocolic, gastrosplenic omentum and entry into the lesser sac. Not only that, the 4th important step is release of ligament of Treats, especially the way you do when you are doing a Whipple's resection. So you have to release the ligament of Treats, because that is going to give you a good access to D4, because getting a good access to D4, and you know that 1/4 of the injury are going to involve the D4, that is the junction of the fixed and the mobile part of the duodenum. So release of ligament of Treats again is very, very important. So intraoperatively, you have to see that all these things you have done. You have done a Cockerization, you have done a cattle brush, you have opened the lesser sac, and any hematoma in this area needs to be explored. You just don't say that, oh, there is a hematoma sitting over there, I won't touch it because it will start bleeding, because underneath that hematoma is going to be some sort of injury. So we need to know what that injury is. Okay, whether that injury is a laceration, whether there is ductal leak, or whether there is a vessel injury. So occasionally you might find that if there is a associated, or if there is a bile leak or bile staining, you might have to do what is called as a needle cholecystocholangiogram. What does that mean? That you take a dye in a syringe needle and inject it through the gallbladder. Okay, so that is what is called as a needle cholecystocholangiogram. So that will delineate the extrahepatic biliary tree. You can instill methylene blue, as I've told you. You tell your anesthetist to put in methylene blue through the nasogastric tube, and that will also come and delineate the rest of the duodenum. So if there is any duodenal leak or laceration, small laceration, that will be seen with this methylene blue instillation. And intraoperatively, sometimes you might have to resort to intraoperative cholangiography or a pancreaticography to get details of the ampulla of water or pancreatic duct or extrahepatic biliary tree. So any edema, crepitus, bile staining in this area implies a pancreaticoduodenal injury unless until proven to be otherwise. This is one dictum you have to keep in mind. Now coming to the grading and how that grading is going to guide us for the treatment. If it is grade 1 and 2, non-surgical, if the patient qualifies for NOM, or if a patient qualifies for operation because of some reason, you might just do a simple drainage. If it is a grade 4 and grade 5 injury, this patient would go in for some sort of resection, reconstruction with or without drainage. But it is this grade 3. Grade 3 is a gray zone. They may require surgery or may not require surgery. So we will see that a little later. Now, pancreatic injury, the treatment depends on these 3-4 things: where the injury is, whether it's involving the head, the body, or the tail, and whether the pancreatic duct is involved in that or not. And that is what makes the injury simple or complex. So if the injury is not involving the main duct, so if it is a grade 1, grade 2 injury, it can be managed with external drainage. It can be managed with NOM also, but now we are seeing, we have already finished the NOM part. We are seeing those patients who have been opened up because of some reason. Okay, so if the injury is not involving main duct, that is grade 1, grade 2 injury, they can be managed with external drainage. And there have been some studies which have shown that octreotide, they will help to reduce the hospitalization. If there is a injury to the main duct, we have to see where the injury is. If it is in the distal body or the tail, and if a patient qualifies for surgery, you can do a distal pancreatectomy with or without splenectomy. It all depends on your surgical expertise, because to preserve a spleen during a distal pancreas is a expert surgery. It requires an expert surgeon, because the splenic vein gives minute branches to the pancreas all along that body and tail, and you have to take care of that. So it involves not only expertise, it involves extra time also for performing that operation. So if you can do that operation, if you can preserve the spleen, preserve it. But if you cannot, you can do a distal pancreatectomy along with splenectomy, and of course you have to drain this patient. If you have the expertise to perform a Roux-en-Y loop, you can perform a Roux-en-Y loop. You can put in a Roux-en-Y jejunal loop, which will help you to preserve the body and tail of the pancreas. You can remove 80 to 90% of the normal pancreas without significant endocrine and exocrine deficiency. So this is something which you can keep in your mind. So 80 to 90% of the pancreas can be resected without significant endocrine exocrine deficiency. So coming to pancreatic head, if there is no duct injury, again it doesn't differ from the management or body tail. That is, you just drain it externally. So whatever minor ducts might be injured and juices would come out through the minor duct, they would come out and they would not form a collection inside. But if there is a ductal injury, you can drain it and allow the patient to go in and form a chronic fistula, and later on treat the fistula. Or you can put in a Roux-en-Y loop. Duodenal diverticalization and pyloric exclusion, I'll just come to that a little later. These are little major operation, and these are operations which are usually reserved for major injury, that is grade 4 and 5. Maybe you won't do it for grade 3, but you'll do it for grade 4 and 5. And amongst these operations, duodenal diverticalization is little obsolete operation. At the most, you would do a pyloric exclusion operation. Again, you have to remember that Whipple's operation, that is a emergency pancreaticoduodenectomy, is an operation which is reserved for irreparable duodenal injury and especially pancreatic injury along with CBD, terminal CBD injury. And you have to remember that it requires a lot of experience, a lot of expertise in performing these operations. They are not for a routine surgeon. Most of these patients are going to be unstable. They are going to have a lot of associated injury to cause so much of complex grade 4 and grade 5 injury. So most of them are going to qualify for a damage control surgery rather than an emergency Whipple's. And if at all any patient qualifies for Whipple's operation, try to do it as a two-step procedure rather than one-step procedure, because emergency Whipple's carry a very high mortality. So in the first stage, you would only do resection, debridement, drainage, and reconstruction would be considered as at a second stage when the patient is more stable. So this is something which you have to keep in mind. And at the same time, you have to remember that there should be all the time access to enteral feeding, because this is something which is going to make a lot of difference. You cannot keep this patient on TPN because TPN has its own complication rate. So you have to keep an access to enteral feeding either via nasojejunal tube or via jejunostomy at the primary index operation. So what is the easy approach to the treatment? So let us again summarize. The easy approach to the treatment depends on this thing. I have divided the pancreas and the duodenum complex at the level of the SMA axis. So this is the SMA axis.
Hello.
So everything depends on this. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah.
Sir, sorry to interrupt. We are reaching 9 o'clock. I think we are going towards the end of the. These are the few last slides only.
Yeah. Just about 4-5 slides more. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So the easy approach is grade 1 and grade 2 non-operative or simple drainage. If you are to the left side of the SMA, distal pancreatectomy and splenectomy. And if you are right side of the SMA, you can do either a mid pancreatectomy or put in a drainage or put in a Roux-en-Y loop. And Whipple's would be a stage procedure. If a patient is a child, always try to do a splenic salvage. Always try to preserve a spleen, because the complication of splenectomy are more seen in a child rather than an adult. And anterior Roux-en-Y pancreaticojejunostomy has sometimes been described for a injury involving the pancreatic duct where the posterior pancreas is intact. It is something very similar to the anterior or longitudinal Roux-en-Y or the Puy-Strauss operation, which we do normally for chronic pancreatitis. But you have to remember that this is a normal pancreas, this is a contused pancreas, this is a lacerated pancreas, and it's not going to hold the sutures like a chronic pancreas or like a fibrotic pancreas. The complication of pancreatic injuries like fistulas, pancreatic abscess, fistula are more common. They are seen in nearly 1/3 of these patients. And how do you diagnose them? The fluid, you do fluid amylase lipase level, and usually these amylase lipase level are very high. They are in thousands. And what is the implication of that? Is that if they are in few thousand, that is up to 5 to 10, usually these fistulas they close off. But if they are more than that, this patient might require a surgical intervention. So the treatment would be drainage, nutrition, somatostatin, and anything that doesn't settle down in about 6 to 8 weeks, you might have to consider for surgery and putting in a loop. Abscess is another complication, and most of the time it is treated with interventional radiologists by putting in a pigtail catheter or a laparotomy. Post-trauma pancreatitis usually resolves with conservative line of treatment. Pseudocyst is treated just like any other pseudocyst. You allow it to mature for at least about 3 to 4 months, and then percutaneous drainage or surgery according to the merit. Duodenum is treated in four. You have to think of 4 principles. That is, you have to restore the intestinal continuity, decompress the lumen, provide a good external drainage, and a good nutritional support. So these are the 4 pillars of treatment of dural injury. Hematomas are treated conservatively, and only those hematomas which don't settle in 1 or 2 or 3 weeks, you will consider them for decompression, either open, lap, or percutaneous. A laceration would be debrided and sutured primarily, and you buttress it with omentum. Okay, you strengthen it with omentum. Okay, and if there is a duodenal loss, put in a Roux-en-Y loop, or you can debride it and do a duodenojejunectomy. If the duodenum is transected, you can do a end-to-end anastomosis if the ends are good or healthy, or if the ends are not good or healthy, again put in a Roux-en-Y loop. And an occasional patient, you might consider doing a Billroth 2 operation. Okay, and Whipple's, as I've told you, is reserved for grade 5 injuries, and do it as a stage procedure rather than one stage procedure. And of course, all the patients who are unstable, you would consider damage control surgery. Now, something about this duodenal diverticulization, which was described by Bernays about 50 or 60 years back. It is too major a procedure for a trauma patient to tolerate it. And usually nowadays we don't do this operation because it involves removal of distal half of the stomach and intubating the CBD, etc. All this takes sufficient time. So it prolongs the operative time, which these trauma patient may not be able to tolerate. Pyloric exclusion is done in some patient where you feel that your closure of the duodenum is not so secure. So you can use a absorbable suture, non-absorbable suture. You can use a stapler to close the pylorus. And if at all you have used a non-absorbable suture, you can do endoscopic reversal of that. You can put in an endoscope and cut those sutures later on after 2 or 3 weeks. And along with that, you do a gastrojejunostomy. So these are all the complications of duodenal injury, like fistulas, strictures. They are treated on their own merit. Now, this is something which you have to keep in mind, that mortality of a normal Whipple is less than 5%. And in high volume center, those who are doing at least about 6 to 12 Whipples in a year, the high volume center, it is about 1 to 2%. But in trauma, the mortality is about 35%. But if you do it as a stage procedure, this same mortality from 35% comes to about 15%. So that gives some place for a stage Whipple's operation. Now, outcome of pancreaticoduodenal injury, the morbidity mortality is quite high, and most of the time it is because of the complication and because of other injury. So with that, I come to the end of my talk, and before I end my talk, let us just see one slide. What are the frequent errors which we make in these injuries? Many times we rely on isolated serum amylase level to diagnose or rule out pancreatic injury. So that is something which you have to keep in mind. Don't rely on one parameter only. If the patient's first CT scan is normal, you might have to repeat a CT scan after 24 hours or 48 hours or even after 96 hours to keep a watch on them. Assuming a normal DPL or a CT scan that that everything is normal, or everything, a normal CT scan rules out a pancreaticoduodenal injury. This is again one error which we make sometime. Failure to open a hematoma. I told you that sometimes if there is a hematoma, a surgeon might feel that, oh, let us not disturb the hematoma. So failure to open upper retroperitoneal hematoma around the pancreas and the duodenum. Failure to completely expose the pancreas. I told you those 4 steps which you have to do. You have to do Coccus, you have to do cattle brush, you have to mobilize the 4th part of the duodenum up to the 4th part of the duodenum. You have to mobilize the ligament of Treats, and you have to open the lesser sac. So these are 4 steps you have to do to completely expose the pancreas. Failure to adequately search for a cause of bile staining. If there is bile staining, you have to search for it, and unless until you find a cause for the bile staining, don't close up that patient. Attempting complex reconstruction at the time of index primary operation. This is something again which we have to avoid. So this is a good algorithm. It is given in standard books, and those who want to know more details about it can refer to it. This is another excellent article in World Journal of Emergency Surgery on duodenal, pancreatic, and extrahepatic biliary injury. So my last slide carry home message would be that isolated pancreatic or isolated dural injury are not so common. combined injuries again are not so common. They form just about 5% of abdominal injury. But when they occur, you have to be aware of the combined injury because of the close proximity. CT scan, a contrast enhanced CT scan with both oral and IV contrast, ERCP and MRCP. So these three investigations, they form the most important part of the investigative tools in this, in the trauma. Ductal anatomy and continuity will guide the treatment. Wide drainage, debridement, Roux-en-Y pancreatic jejunostomy, distal pancreatectomy with or without splenectomy suffices in most of the patient. Early surgery, whenever you do surgery, whenever you diagnose less than 24 hours and do early surgery, the better result. You have to be aware of post-operative complication, because sometimes it is the post-operative complication that kills. It is not the injury or the management or the operation first 24 hours which kill the patient, but it is a post-operative complication like a pancreatic fistula, like a duodenal fistula, like a abscess which kills the patient. And emergency Whipple's has a high mortality. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation, and I thank once again Dr. Abdul and Dr. Yogesh and Dr. Wag and Dr. Tonpe for giving me this opportunity to talk to you about on this topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now I hand over proceedings to Dr. Wag, sir. Sir, you are unmuted. You can just start session with question answers or your comments on that. Tome, sir, I have also unmuted you.
Yeah.
Please,
Hello.
Tome, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Sharma, for enlightening us regarding pancreaticoduodenal trauma. It was excellent teaching session, and you have really covered this relatively uncommon topic in a very candid fashion.
Thank you, sir.
So this was a good teaching session. I have you have actually covered everything. Just a few things which we see. We are not in medical college or trauma centers, so we do get patients with pancreaticoduodenal injuries, which have already been fiddled with by many doctors.
Right.
So a common thing which I have encountered in my practice has been patient coming to us with a distended abdomen ascites. In other words, pancreatic ascites basically.
Ascites.
And
yes.
then pancreatic ascites and nutritional depletion by then, and sometimes bacterial peritonitis of that ascitic fluid.
Right.
So you must also have come across such patient, and how do you take care of such patient?
Yes, actually, I mentioned I had written about that in my slide on pancreatic fistula, but I think as we were coming close to the presentation and we lack of time, I could not cover it in detail. So pancreatic ascites is basically because of a slow leakage from the duct, and most of the time you diagnose it by tapping it and finding a high level of amylase and lipase level in that. And the treatment is usually by the endoscopist. Okay, so most of the time it is the interventional radiologist or the interventional gastroenterologist who's going to put in a stent, who's going to do a good papillotomy to relieve the pressure and do a pancreatic duct stenting for that.
Very true.
Yeah.
What we have experienced many a times that because of the duodenal edema or edema in that region, even a ERCP and pancreatic duct stenting success rate would be somewhere between 60 to 70%. Many of these patients fail to get stented.
Yes, agree. I mentioned that in my slide on ERCP. That's the ERCP, even for a expert gastroenterologist, it is difficult in a trauma setting because the anatomy is disturbed.
Yeah. So how do you manage then these patients if say endoscopist fails to help you?
If the endoscopist fails to help, then of course these patients would undergo the MRI and MRCP earlier to find where the ductal leak is. Now, if the ductal leak is a distal leak, then this patient would qualify for a surgery. Of course, after all the conservative line of treatment, you have waited enough for the patient to settle down. If he doesn't settle, then this patient will go in for a distal pancreatectomy with or without splenectomy. And if the patient, if the fistula is in a proximal part, then I would put in a Roux-en-Y loop over there.
Thank you.
Hello, sir.
Thank you.
Sir,
Yeah, Vak, sir.
there are two categories of patient where we face where the right on the beginning. One patient is stable,
Right.
where we have a time to
Correct.
and evaluate this patient by investigation.
Correct.
Another set of patients that they are unstable,
Right.
and therefore we can't afford to utilize more time in
Right.
investigation.
Yes.
So therefore, what should be the approach in the both?
Yeah. I think I've already made it very clear in my presentation that the first part, the management depends on three things: the hemodynamic stability of the patient, the clinical picture, and third is the imaging, and especially the ductal continuity. Okay. Now, hemodynamic instability is most important. Those patients who are unstable, okay, you just do a fast in them, and anything you find free fluid or anything positive in that, the patient goes to the OR directly. The patient, you don't have time to do any sort of detailed investigation in this patient. Okay. And in this patient, most of the minor trauma, you would just put in a drain, try to achieve hemostasis, put in a drain, and try to plug that whatever injury is there with omentum, gel foam, Surgicel, etc., and put a big drain, and that's all. And try to do what is called as a damage control surgery. If there is an extensive trauma also, you try to do what is called as a damage control surgery, try to control the bleeding, put in drain, all the devitalized tissue should come out so that the patient doesn't develop infection in that, put packing over there, and take the patient back to the ICU. The patient should not go
Yeah.
in the lethal triad of acidosis, hypothermia, and coagulopathy, and maybe 48 hours to 96 hours post-operative after good ICU management. Once the patient stabilizes, this patient would come in for a second look laparotomy.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sharma, one more question.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir, I'm
In
listening.
a patient of distal injuries, you have two
Right.
options. You can put in a simple drainage and feeding
Right.
jejunostomy maybe, and otherwise
Right.
you do a distal pancreatectomy, which can be slightly major operation.
Right.
Now, between these two, even in emergency, when you do distal pancreatectomy, the rate of
Right.
pancreatic fistulization are still there.
Yes.
The stump can give way because stump is too edematous. It is not holding sutures, and pancreatic fistula does occur.
Right.
So, which is the rate of fistula is more with simple drainage or with distal pancreatectomy, and which is better?
See, the rate of pancreatic fistula, we don't know the exact figures because you cannot have a randomized control trial. Okay, there is no
True.
randomized control trial. So the only thing what you can do is that if at all you are doing a surgery, and if at all you are thinking of doing a distal pancreatectomy, how you can reduce the incidence of pancreatic fistula. There are many ways of doing that. One thing is use of stapler, okay, so that you get a nice secure way. Second thing is that try to identify the duct. There have been studies where people have done a distal pancreatectomy with identification and without identification of the duct. And if you identify the duct and secure it separately compared to the
Yes.
pancreas, rest of the pancreas, the incidence of
Yeah.
fistula is less. Third thing is buttressing it with omentum. You cover it with omentum. You can use glue. You can use a fibrin glue to seal off the pancreatic duct, the closure of the pancreatic duct, closure of the parenchyma, and put in a wide drainage. Okay. And
White.
fifth thing is use of somatostatin or octreotide post-operatively. So these are some 5-6 things which you can do in an attempt to reduce the incidence of pancreatic fistula.
Yeah. Another query was all these
Yes.
fancy procedures describe rule loops
Right.
and distal proximal. In emergency setting, how many times really these are possible technically? Or
I
you
would
end up
say,
doing simple drainage only?
yeah. See, if the duodenum is lacerated, I would like to close the laceration, but sometimes if you find that if the wall is not too good, contuses, and I feel that it is little compromised, I would like to put in a Roux-en-Y loop. It is definitely a good technique. And as far as the incidence is concerned, I have done roughly just about 2-figure patient Roux-en-Y loop in an emergency setting.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, I'll just see into the audience if there are any questions. There is a
Yes.
good comment by our Secretary of Surgeons Association, Nagpur, Dr. Bansod.
Yes.
His comment is a mesmerizing talk, sir. Each and every aspect already covered by you. Nothing
Thank
left
you.
to ask. That was the good description he had to say about your talk. So we
Thank you.
don't have any question right now.
Okay.
Right now. So only one thing which I wanted to ask, just what Tome sir said, I'll just extend to that. Sir, about the various aspects of closure of pancreatic stump which you mentioned,
Yes.
usage of stapler, usage of glue or momentum and all those things. These are the studies being done on a patient in whom the distal pancreatectomy is done mostly in a malignant setup or chronic pancreatitis type of thing. In a trauma, applying a stapler in a traumatized pancreas which is already split up, or taking a bites on that pancreatic duct, identifying it, or taking a bite. As you said, it's
Right.
already a soft pancreas. Because of
Right.
trauma, there is a lot of local inflammation. So doing all these things, whether it will really hold the sutures well or not, we are already worried when we are doing a PJ in a Whipple in a soft pancreas. In a soft traumatized pancreas with surrounding inflammation, all the more difficult. So
Right.
as Tome sir,
Agreed.
one of the experience, probably because of his experience, he might have said that just put in a drain in acute situation and see if our endoscopist can put across a stent that may
Right.
heal the fistula, or in later date when that fistula forms a very good track, that time probably taking a suture on that pancreatic stump could be an easier option.
Correct.
I guess Tome
Totally
sir, you
agreed.
wanted to ask the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Many a
So
times for saving life, controlling the situation into converting a situation into a controlled pancreatic fistula, especially in an isolated pancreatic injury, is a safer and easier option than
Right.
doing the fancy procedures, especially if
Yes.
patients have come to you very late, which normally happens. We don't
Right.
see patient within first 24 hours when one would
Right.
like to do all those fancy procedures.
Right.
Generally, patients come very late,
Correct.
and by then your all options remain theoretical, and you have discussed in meetings and read about them, but you really can't apply them in practice. That is what
Right.
happens when that
Right.
been the
But
experience.
just
Sharma sir,
one
as
point
a
I would like to tell over here is that basically it depends on your imaging. If your
Very
imaging shows a complete transaction, if your imaging shows a complete transaction, okay, then it is
yeah,
better that this patient goes early for a distal pancreatectomy. If a
very true. Very
if
true.
a imaging shows a extravasation which indicates a side leak, then these patients probably with a drainage and with the ERCP and stenting, you might be able to take care of it.
Yes, sir. Yes. So if we have an image in which the pancreas has a two pieces over that vertebra, one on the right side
Yes.
and one on the left side, then there is full of drainage. You just have to remove the remaining pancreas. Even if it
Yes.
develops fistula, that can be managed with stent in a post-operative period.
Absolutely.
If the bites are
Absolutely.
not good, if we could not secure the stump, then that can be managed with a stenting in post-operative period, right? But
Correct.
if it's not a two pieces pancreas, then the drainage procedure can be used. That's what I guess.
Yes. Very much agree.
Or another thing which is upcoming nowadays, and with the availability of very strong interventional radiologists, sometimes you
Yes.
get a bleeding, uh,
Yes.
hemoperitoneum and splenic injuries, and they
Correct.
are like now venturing into even pancreatic bleedings and all, and they
Correct.
do angioembolization in such cases. Have you come
Yes.
across such radiologists where they angioembolized first and then you had to go in and do surgery, or they were
Yes. We
successful or unsuccessful like that?
Yeah, we have done angioembolization for the splenic artery. Yeah, I remember about 2 or 3 cases where we have done embolization for the splenic artery. Okay, but as far as the rest of the pancreaticodural etc. is concerned, we have not encountered any patient for that.
In, on
And as
which
I said that
occasions? Splenic
we require services of 3 people. 3 I are very important. One is
yeah.
this intensive care. One is good imaging round the clock. You require good imaging for that. You require services of need to do a selective angiography for that. So you require micro catheters. You should be able to put a micro catheter in the superior mesenteric artery and celiac artery, and you should be able to delineate those. Then only you can go ahead with those type of intervention.
Sir, how do you do intraoperative pancreatography?
I
Have
have
you really
myself, I
used
have
it?
no, I have not done, but it is done. What is described in the literature? You do a small duodenotomy, locate the ampulla of water. Okay, like we used to do
Cannulated.
sphincteroplasty or sphincterotomy in olden days. Okay, and through that you
Yeah.
put in a catheter, and under C-arm you can do a intraoperative pancreatography. You require a C-arm for that.
Yeah,
Thank you, Pradeep sir. Thank you, Tome sir and Dr. Wak sir, for that good lecture and very good discussion after that.
Right.
Now we are already around 9:30. There are no questions from the audience. So I guess with permission of our panelists, I'd like to close the session.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
sure.
thank you, Dr. Qureshi. Thank you, Dr. Qureshi. Thank you, Dr. Yogesh. Thank you,
you, sir.
Dr. Wag, and thank you, Dr. Tome.
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
Okay, and thank you,
Thank you very much.
all the members of VSA. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.
Yeah, Pradeep sir, I am giving a trial run to tomorrow's speaker, so you
Yeah,
can.
yeah, sure. I will leave the webinar. Yeah.
सर अनम्यूट कीजिए सर अपने आप को, प्लीज अनम्यूट योरसेल्फ उन्मेद सर.
हाँ, नाउ आई एम अनम्यूटेड.
या अभी आवाज आ रहा है, आपका वेबकैम दिख रहा है सर. आपको
हाँ,
एक ऑप्शन आएगा शेयर योर स्क्रीन करके.
शो माय स्क्रीन ना.
या शो करिए सर, शो योर स्क्रीन. हाँ, ये मुझे आपका लैपटॉप दिख गया है.
ओके.
तो अभी आप आपका पावर पॉइंट ओपन कीजिए एक बार.
नहीं, बट ओके, आई मस्ट बी इन फुल स्क्रीन मोड.
नहीं, आपको आपका वेबकैम नहीं दिखेगा सर. व्हेन यू शेयर योर स्क्रीन.
हाँ, नहीं, बट मुझे वेबकैम ही दिख रहा है अभी फिलहाल तो.
अच्छा, अभी आपको वेबकैम ही दिख रहा है सिर्फ.
हाँ, हाँ.
नहीं, अच्छा, आप पावर पॉइंट ऑन कीजिए ना एक बार. आप
एक मिनट.
मुझे आपका स्क्रीन दिख रहा है यहाँ पे पूरा.
दिख रहा है ना.
हाँ हाँ.
नहीं, अभी मैं ओपन कर रहा हूँ. मुझे अगर मैं विंडो क्लोज करता हूँ तो एग्जिट हो जाऊंगा क्या?
कौन सी विंडो क्लोज करेंगे?
ये गो टू वेबिनार वाली पैनल की जो है.
कीजिए ना, मिनिमाइज कीजिए उसको.
मिनिमाइज
या ऊपर एक रेड एरो है, हाइड कंट्रोल पैनल करके. हाइड कंट्रोल पैनल.
हाँ, वो हो गया. हेलो,
अब क्या दिख रहा है? हाँ सर.
हाँ, अभी स्क्रीन आ रहा है. एक मिनट रुक जा. कैन यू सी मी?
यस यस, आई कैन सी यू. आप
बट आई कैन नॉट सी यू. ओके, अभी मैं ओपन कर रहा हूँ.
मेरा वेबकैम बंद है सर.
ओके ओके, ठीक है ना. 1 सेक. Now I am opening the PPT.
यस यस यस.
दिख गया ना?
हाँ हाँ हाँ. ओपन हो रहा है।
तो जब भी मैं प्रेजेंट करूंगा तो आई वोंट बी एबल टू सी माई सेल्फ ना, मेरा वेबकैम ऑफ
Yeah, you
रहेगा ना?
will be able to see your own webcam. आपके स्क्रीन पे सिर्फ आपका पावर पॉइंट दिखेगा।
और कम्युनिकेशन किसके किसके साथ रहेगा मेरा ऑन? तेरे साथ और
सबके साथ, सारी पब्लिक सुनेगी आपको और आप दिखेंगे भी
नहीं
हम।
नहीं नहीं, बात मेरे से कौन कर पाएगा? जिनको तू अनम्यूट करेगा वही ना?
हाँ, जिनको मैं अनम्यूट करूंगा। आपका टॉक होने के बाद दासगुप्ता सर और गेडाम सर शुरुआत करेंगे और उसके बाद
ओके।
अगर कोई क्वेश्चन तो लोग देखेंगे आपको।
अच्छा, अभी ये स्क्रीन अच्छे से दिख रहा है तेरे को?
हाँ, एकदम बढ़िया। मैं व्हाट्सअप कर रहा हूँ, देखो आपको आपका वेबकैम और आपका स्क्रीन पूरा दिख रहा है।
हाँ, भेज। अच्छा, मैं एक बार वीडियो रन करूँ क्या?
हाँ, वीडियो रन करके देख लो ना।
ये अभी सिर्फ अपन दोनों ही है ना इसमें?
हाँ हाँ, अभी 2 ही लोग हैं।
तो कल क्या 3 केसेस रखा है तूने?
हाँ, 3। पहला कौस्तुभ साल्डा का है, सेकंड आपका है और
ओके।
थर्ड मैडम का है।
अच्छा, 8 बजे से है ना?
8 बजे। तो
और
मैंने ये
कौन
दे दिया है, उसका इनवाइट दे दिया
ओके,
है।
गेडाम सर और कौन है? दासगुप्ता सर।
दासगुप्ता सर।
ओके, ये देख अभी वीडियो प्ले हो रहा है।
यस यस यस,
रिजोल्यूशन अच्छा है?
एकदम बढ़िया रिजोल्यूशन है, एकदम बढ़िया।
ओके,
आपका
एक
सिर्फ
मिनट।
घर के बाकी सारे वाईफाई के कनेक्शंस छोड़ देना, सो दैट यहाँ
हाँ,
पे
सारे
अच्छा
वाईफाई बाकी बंद रखूंगा मैं। हाँ, मेरा ही
बिल्कुल
चालू
बिल्कुल
रखूंगा। ठीक है, ठीक
अच्छा
है।
दिख रहा है
दिख रहा
सर,
है ना
कोई
अच्छे से? ओके।
बिल्कुल
ओके।
बिल्कुल अच्छा दिख।
अच्छा, तो ये होने के बाद जैसे बाद में
राइट।
मैं क्लोज करता हूँ तो फिर वेबकैम मुझे ऑन कर सकता हूँ मैं मेरा?
नहीं,
ऐसा
आप
है
क्या
क्या?
करना, आप
हाँ।
क्या करना, हाँ, अगर आप आपका पावर पॉइंट बंद करेंगे तो आपको आपका
हाँ।
वेबकैम दिखेगा। वेबकैम सिर्फ हम
हाँ,
प्रेजेंटर का ही ऑन रखते हैं, यानी पैनलिस्ट वगैरह किसी का ऑन नहीं रखते हम यूजुअली। एक
तो
हाथ बारी
वेबकैम के
पैन।
लिए ये इसमें जाके पीपल कैन सी यू, क्लिक टू टर्न ऑफ योर वेबकैम। अभी अच्छा मैं दिख रहा हूँ लेकिन मुझे नहीं पता मैं दिख रहा हूँ, ऐसा है वो? अच्छा।
हाँ, आप दिख ही रहे हो। आप क्या करना,
अच्छा।
आपका जो लाइव स्लाइड है थैंक यू का, वो वैसे ही रखना, सो दैट पीपल कैन
ओके
सी योर स्लाइड एंड यू। ठीक है।
ओके 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 ओके,
या
ठीक है ना?
या
चल
ओके,
ठीक है, कल फिर करते हैं। ओके, चल, थैंक
ठीक
यू।
है, कल करते हैं सर। ओके।